Okay.
In New York racing, parimutuel wagering and breeding law, section 102 provides that the New York State Gaming Commission shall consist of 7 members appointed by the governor by and with the advice and consent of the Senate. 6 members having been confirmed by the New York State Senate affords the commission an ability to establish quorum and undertake action. This meeting of the Gaming Commission is now called to order. Ms. Secretary, will you please call the roll?
John Crotty.
Here.
Mark Guerin.
Present.
Peter Machete.
Here.
John Poklemba.
Here.
Barry Sample.
Here.
Todd Snyder.
Here.
Ms. Secretary, will you please have the record reflect that a quorum of qualified members are present, thus enabling the transaction of business. Mr. Chairman.
Great. Well, good morning. We begin with the approval of the Commission minutes from May 27th, 2014. They've been provided to members in advance. And at the outset, I'd ask any members if you have any edits, corrections, or amendments to the minutes.
No. No.
Okay. Madam Secretary, please let the record reflect the minutes were adopted. Next on our agenda is the report of the Executive Director.
Thank you. I'd like to discuss 3 issues of potential interest. First, to apprise you of the latest activities of the Gaming Facility Location Board. Second, to briefly recap Belmont Stakes Day. And lastly, to discuss recently passed legislation from the legislative session that concluded this last Friday. Since our last meeting on May 27th, the Gaming Facility Location Board has issued a variety of guidance documents concerning host municipality resolutions, document submission guidelines, secret guidance, and multiple sets of answers to new bidder questions. The Board and the Joint Commission on Public Ethics also issued a Q&A regarding casino lobbying jointly. We are now down to 17 potential applicants. Yesterday, Grosinger Development Corporation formally requested a refund of their application fee. We fully refunded their fee late yesterday afternoon. Monday, June 30th at 4 p.m. is, of course, the deadline for the filing of bid applications. Commission staff continues to actively assist the Gaming Facility Location Board. Staff remains working on drafts of regulations to govern this new industry, and we've been engaging the New York State Police to ensure that their applicant review proceeds smoothly and meets the expectations of both the Gaming Facility Location Board and you gentlemen. With respect to the Belmont Stakes Day, while California Chrome failed to become the 12th winner of the Triple Crown, NYRA did have quite an impressive day. The on-track handle was $19.1 million, and all sources handle was $150 million. Both amounts surpassed previous all-time NYRA records. The previous records were set on October 29th of 2005 when a Belmont Cup Day was hosted at Belmont Park. The previous Belmont Stakes handle records were beaten by $5 million on track and by nearly $40 million in all sources handle. The announced attendance was 102,199, which was the 3rd highest attendance in Belmont Stakes history. NYRA did, however, receive some problems or some difficulty with patron egress. A record number of fans, some 36,000, arrived at Belmont via Long Island Railroad. While patron arrival was generally staggered, patron departure was much more concentrated, which led to very long waits for trains. Egress from parking lots was similarly complicated. Obviously, many of the issues, such as the LIRR availability and traffic flow once the crowds exit Belmont Park onto local thoroughfares, are not solely within NYRA's ability to resolve, but NYRA President Chris Kay has pledged to work with local officials to address future transportation needs. NYRA did also experience some on-track issues. They lacked some lighting in the remote parking areas. There were a few parking attendants, very few parking attendants directing the egress after the races, and there were some apparent issues with the efficacy of security officials. I believe NYRA understands the patrons' experiences. Some patrons' experiences were poor and have committed to examining the conditions that led to these experiences. From the Commission staff perspective, we have realized a few lessons relative to our operations, and yesterday even conducted a meeting chaired by Dr. Palmer, to talk about our operations, and we anticipate meeting with NYS staff to discuss our findings and try to resolve any of the issues that we've identified internally. Lastly, at the end of this year's legislative session, this past Friday, a couple of bills passed. Council's office will be preparing a memorandum like they did last year that identified all the various legislation that passed during the session, but I thought it would be prudent to just touch upon the few highlights from the very, very end. There were two bills that were germane to Commission's interests. Assembly 10,075 would amend the tax law to allow video lottery gaming facilities to operate until 6 a.m. This changed the previous language that requires closure at 4 a.m. The same legislation increased the annual value of free play credits authorized for use by video lottery gaming facilities from 10% to 15%. Both of these changes were intended to enhance revenues and attendance. Senate 5584 would also amend, this one would amend the racing, parimutuel wagering, and breeding law. This would require that a franchise corporation operating a simulcast theater in a region wholly contained within one county would be permitted to operate only pursuant to an agreement with that regional off-track betting corporation, and that revenues from that agreement would be distributed pursuant to, or from the operation would be distributed pursuant to the agreement. There were several bills that were germane to the Commission that failed to pass both houses. Amongst the most significant was an omnibus Senate bill that would have eliminated a variety of things in horse racing: dark day, maintenance of effort payments made from regional off-track betting corporations to harness racetracks, made some technical corrections to the regulation of multi-jurisdictional account wagering providers, and provided for the free play and the extension of hours, among other things. It passed the Senate 56-2, but was not considered by the Assembly. The only other bill that, there was another bill that passed as well that would have extended Catskill OTB into the 5 counties that comprise New York City, which is the former footprint of the New York City Off-Track Betting Corporation. This legislation passed the Senate 44-15, but wasn't considered by the Assembly. The last bill that was a one-house bill that passed in the last week was a bill that would have required NYR's independent business integrity monitor to make their reports available to the Franchise Oversight Board upon request. That bill passed the Senate 58-0, but was not considered by the Assembly. Mr. Chairman?
Any questions, Mr. Williams, this report?
We should also note that our acting executive director is now our official executive director.
Good.
Congratulations on
There's
that.
enthusiasm, gratitude. Well said. Well, moving on our agenda, the next item for action was the appointment of a gaming facility location board member. My understanding is that we will not be making that appointment today. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct, Mr. Chairman. We still are waiting on some paperwork that would finalize that, and it's premature to actually consider any action on that today.
Great. So we will await that in the appropriate notice. To rulemaking.
Do you have to be present for those appointments?
You mean, can they be
I
telephoned?
mean, we're in a time-sensitive nature. We said we're going to do things on a monthly basis rolling forward. If we do that, the next meeting will be towards the end of July.
Yeah, I think if we had an ability to get names in front of you, we would try to do a teleconference on the record.
Okay.
That
seems reasonable enough.
That would be my preference. We're also looking into the possibility of whether you guys can exercise an approval in writing to be confirmed. But I think the general consensus of the individuals that have expressed an opinion on this is they would prefer to do a formal meeting, formal emergency meeting.
Oh, okay.
Do you have a preference?
No. Whatever they need, just they're in a time-sensitive window.
Because it's July 20th.
It's July. People are pulling all around. You wouldn't want to get stuck short. If you could do it by phone, and there was conformity of thought, it would seem reasonable enough to me.
As long as we had some time with the background materials.
Understood.
We could do it, from my perspective,
fairly quickly.
Whatever makes people happy by phone or in.
Yeah, that was my only point. It would seem to be harder to coordinate a single point in time over the next 3 weeks than it would be to get everyone on the phone at one single time.
And rather than wait till July 28th.
Yeah.
That was the only thought.
The phone would be a problem because of open meetings concerns.
Okay.
But we could do a video conference, and that's readily easy to do in this time.
Yeah, I'm traveling a little. I don't know what other people are doing, but
that we can also, if we were able to obtain a quorum on a video conference, others could call in and express their how they would vote had they been able to be present in the video.
Yeah. Keep in mind, I have the equipment if we can if you want to do that.
We can all go to Todd's house.
Todd's office. The record reflect it was the office.
You're always welcome in Geneva. Okay, well, why don't we turn to, no other questions on that, to rulemaking. New York State's Racing Parimutuel Wagering Breeding Law 104.19 authorizes the Commission to promulgate rules and regulations that it deems necessary to carry out its responsibilities. To that regard, the Commission will from time to time promulgate rules and rule amendments pursuant to the State Administrative Procedure Act. So today we have 3 rulemaking items for consideration. So, Mr. Williams, if you could outline those proposals, that would be helpful.
Certainly. The first proposal for Commission consideration is the adoption of amendments to our standardbred out-of-competition testing rule. The proposal was adopted by the Commission at its March 12, 2014 meeting. The proposed amendments will, among other things, clarify the existing rule, incorporate Commission enforcement protocols, and make the rule more uniform with the Commission's thoroughbred racing out-of-competition rule. Only one public comment was received. The Empire State Harness Horsemen's Alliance, which represents harness horsemen's organizations at 6 New York racetracks, made a multifaceted argument in opposition to the rule. A previously circulated memorandum from Counsel Ed Burns identified each of the various alliance arguments and addressed each.
Any questions on the adoption of the amendments to our standardbred out-of-competition testing rule as a permanent rule? Any questions from the commissioners? Comments? Ed, anything else to add from your?
Nothing further to add other than what you've seen before. Yep.
Right. Everything is before as well. May I have a motion then to adopt the amendments to our standardbred out-of-competition testing rule as a permanent rule?
Sure.
Motion by Mr. Crotty. Second?
Second.
Discussion on the motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The next rule making regards to the use of cellular phones in a standardbred paddock.
Last August, the Commission authorized a rule permitting the use of cellular telephones or other electronic communication devices in a designated area of a harness racing paddock or receiving barn, effective for 1 year. The current rule followed a similar 1-year experiment by the former Racing and Wagering Board that had expired on February 15th of 2013. In adopting the rule last August, commissioners expressed a desire to understand how New York's experience was progressing and how other jurisdictions treated the issue. Do we have Brian Berry on the telephone today?
Yes, we do. Hello.
Brian is our director of racing officials. He surveyed the presiding judges at the state's racetrack and can speak intelligently to what our experience has been. Mr. Berry, would you please report your findings?
Yes, sir. All of the presiding judges at Yonkers, Monticello, Tioga, Vernon, Saratoga, and Buffalo reported no problems with the new rule. The designated area signs were all posted at the entrance to the paddock, and the horsemen were complying and just using that area to make the cell phone calls. There were only 2 fines for misuse in other areas in the whole year. So after they get a warning, they do use the designated area. As far as the other jurisdictions, it's in the USTA rulebook, rule number 5, number 11G, that cell phones are permitted in the paddocks. Also, the New Jersey and Pennsylvania commissions allow them anywhere in the paddock. The only place they restrict them is the track itself. They find that any driver that brings a cell phone out onto the track.
Other staff research also indicated that Delaware allows the use of the cell phone in a paddock, but not while walking or riding a horse. And Ohio does not permit the use of cellular telephones in the paddock at all. Other research that was conducted indicates that neither Massachusetts nor Maine seems to have ever addressed this concern in regulation, probably leaving it to the USDA rules for address. Brian, you have anything else to add?
No, sir.
Well, thank you, Brian, and to Rob. Any questions from the commissioners on the proposed rulemaking? So, as I understand it, this was an experiment. Now with the commission, well, we've got the newly constituted commission. Now we're coming back to this for this final hearing.
Well, the commission adopted it last August on a one-year experimental basis to see how the experience would bear out with the rule.
And to look at other jurisdictions.
And to see what the experience was in other jurisdictions.
I think we were concerned there was going to be an enforcement issue, maybe there'd be some resistance, and it appears that we have not seen that in any significant regard.
My understanding is there are only, I think, 2 fines for people who wouldn't comply. Generally what happens is if one of the judges sees someone who's not in compliance, he informally reminds them of the rule and tells them where to go when people comply.
All right. Well, may I have a motion then to propose a regulation authorizing the use of cellular telephones or other electronic communication devices in a designated area of a standard bred paddock? Motion. Great. Second?
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. Next is our rulemaking regarding conflict of interest by officials in standard bred racing.
For Commission consideration is a proposed amendment of its standard bred rules intended to strengthen conflict of interest provisions. A current rule prohibits a racing secretary or assistant secretary from being licensed as an owner, trainer, or driver during the racing season. There are, however, potential conflicts of interest if a racing secretary or assistant racing secretary were allowed to race or drive a horse, even if such racing occurred out of the state, because working for or competing against an owner of a horse which may appear in New York could be perceived as a compromise to the objective performance of the official's duties. This proposal aims to strengthen the current rules by broadening the prohibitions against the activities in which the officials may engage.
Any questions?
Yeah, I actually have a question.
Yeah.
Ed, does this rule come into alignment with the existing thoroughbred racing rule?
There is not a similar rule in thoroughbred racing, but as a practical matter, we don't have people who are race officials ever even proposing or asking for clearance to ride a horse or be a jockey. But you do see that.
Is there some reason that I don't have the experience to recognize why that's always going to be the case, or it's just a matter of time before it arises?
It's hard to make weight on the thoroughbred side. Not so hard on the trotter side. I mean, I guess it could.
Wouldn't you want to just harmonize the rules?
Yeah.
Seems to me that would be a reasonable step to take.
We could look into a parallel and tee that up for you for future consideration.
If we looked into that, then I'd be, I have no other questions about this rule.
So we'll await that
Well,
separate matter. Any more questions on this rulemaking? Great. Okay. Well, may I have a motion then to adopt the proposed rulemaking regarding conflict of interest by officials in standard bred racing? It's been moved. Second? Second. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
The motion carries. Next on our agenda is adjudications. And the Commission has 4 hearing officer reports for consideration today.
I'd like to raise a question for Ed. Ed, I think that when it comes to adjudications, we have the opportunity to have a private discussion, and I'd like to suggest that we do that before we proceed.
Yes, Subdivision 1 of Section 108 of the Public Officers Law provides that the state open meetings law does not apply to judicial and quasi-judicial proceedings, which these administrative adjudications are. So at the discretion of the Commission, you could choose to fully discuss things at an open meeting or discuss some matters privately amongst yourselves at your option.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'd actually suggest that we take a brief recess from the public meeting and have a discussion about the adjudications that are on the agenda so that we can move more smoothly through the public meeting.
And then to return to
And then
new
to return, yes.
business. Do we want to vote on that, or can I just rule on that?
I think you could say, if you don't hear any objections to that.
Any objection to this? Is everyone, it's a good suggestion, concurrent with, okay, so why don't we take this break for executive session, or whatever the particular appropriate term would be, and
Just
we'll be back.
consideration of judicial or quasi-judicial action.
Yeah, well, for the record, it's not an executive session. You could temporarily adjourn the meeting and then discuss some of this business elsewhere, but it's technically not an executive session of the same meeting.
Yeah, we're in essence going off the record.
Yes.
Terrific. Very good.